I stood silently before the cold marble stone, the name etched into it more powerful than any title. My father, a business titan, now just a memory beneath the soil. I, Ray, had returned for his funeral, unsure of what emotions to carry. Grief? Regret? Resentment? But the real shock came after the ceremony. My brother-in-law, Karen, inherited everything. The family business, the estate, and $50 million in assets. Me? All I got was an old, rusted delivery van my father used. To drive years ago? Karan smirked as he tossed me the keys. Fits your style, he said, like it was some twisted joke. But when I sat inside the van, something strange caught my eye. The GPS screen lit up, displaying a preset route. No name, no address, just coordinates blinking silently. My father was never a man of accidents, and I had a feeling this was just the beginning. My name is Ray, and for the last 2 decades I lived far from home, working as a school headmaster in a quiet town. I chose a life of simplicity and purpose, far from the cutthroat world of my father's empire. My decision had cost me more than I expected. It created a silent wall between me and Mr. Ayan, my father, a man who believed legacy was everything, and emotion was weakness. We barely spoke in years. Then there was Karan, my brother-in-law. Once a humble, skilled technician at my father's company, he slowly climbed the ranks, not just in business, but into our family. Over time, he traded loyalty for ambition, charm for manipulation. Lena, my younger sister, was always the peacemaker. She kept the family connected, often shielding my father's coldness with soft words and updating him on my life behind my back. And then there was my mother, Mrs. Allam. Quiet, observant. Her presence rarely filled a room with noise, but always with calm. I never realized how much she had seen, how much she knew, until everything fell apart. Each of us carried secrets, some small, some life-changing, and mine were about to surface. From the moment I graduated, I knew I didn't belong in boardrooms or behind spreadsheets. I wanted to teach, to shape lives, not build skyscrapers or chase contracts. But my father, Mr. Ayan, had other plans. He had built his construction empire from scratch, and in his mind I was meant to carry it forward. When I told him I was becoming a teacher, he didn't argue. He simply turned away and never looked back. That silence became the wall between us. Years passed. I rose through the ranks in education, became a headmaster, and built a life I could be proud of. But every birthday, every holiday, felt incomplete. My sister Lena tried to bridge the gap, sending gifts in my name, telling my father things I was too stubborn to say. "He asks about you," she would whisper. "He just doesn't know how to reach out." Then came the call. Cancer. Stage 4. Suddenly, the years between us felt like seconds. I resigned from my job and returned home. When I arrived, my father didn't say much. He didn't need to. I sat with him, helped him eat, took him to his appointments. In those quiet moments, no words, just presence, we began to understand each other. We never said, "I'm sorry." We never said, "I forgive you." But something unspoken passed between us. A fragile, late peace. And then, just like that, he was gone. A week after the funeral, we gathered in my father's office, the same room where major deals had been made, futures shaped, and lives changed. This time it was for the reading of his will. I sat quietly beside Lena and my mother, expecting nothing. Maybe a gesture, maybe a letter. I wasn't looking for wealth. I just hoped my father had seen me in those final days. But as the lawyer read through the document, a chill crept over me. The company. The estate, the investments, the offshore accounts, all of it, handed to Karen. Lena and I were left with the family home and modest trust funds. And me? My name appeared once, To my son Ray, I leave my old delivery van. There was a long silence. Then came the smirk. Karan leaned in, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. Guess you'll need it to drive back to your little school, huh? I said nothing, just held the keys. The same keys my father once held. At first I thought it was punishment. Then something clicked. Why would a man like Karan be given everything? My father was strict, but never blind. And yet, Karen had maneuvered himself into the center of everything, wearing loyalty like a mask. I remembered how quickly he married Lena after getting promoted. We always showed up when the cameras were around, but disappeared when my father was ill. It was then I began to wonder, had Karan married my sister not for love, but for leverage? Had he been playing a long game, one I never saw coming, the bide? Betrayal cut deeper than any inheritance could heal. Not because of the money, but because I realized we'd all been living beside a stranger in disguise. And now, he had everything, or so he thought. I hadn't touched the van since the day I got it. It sat in the driveway, weathered by time, a relic of my father's simpler days. One quiet morning, I decided to clean it, maybe out of respect, maybe just to clear my head. As I wiped down the dashboard, the GPS screen suddenly lit up. A single route appeared on the screen, already entered, already mapped. No address, just coordinates. Curious, I started the engine. The sound was rough, but steady, like it still had something to say. I followed the route, winding through old roads and forested hills until I reached a small countryside cabin, hidden. Behind a curtain of tall trees, it looked untouched, peaceful, familiar somehow. I stepped out, confused. Why had my father saved this place in the van? And then, to my complete surprise, the cabin door creaked open, and my mother stood there. She smiled gently, as if she'd been expecting me all along. "Your father wanted you to find this," she said softly. "He knew one day you'd come." I didn't know what this place was, but it felt like I had just unlocked a door my father had left open, for me alone. The cabin's interior was simple. Wooden floors, old furniture, a shelf filled with books I remembered from my childhood. It wasn't just a hideaway, it was a sanctuary, one my father had kept secret from the rest of the world. My mother led me to a small wooden box on the table. She opened it gently and pulled out a thick brown envelope. "This is from your father," she said. "He wanted you to read it here." My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter. "Dear Ray, I've caused you pain, more than you deserved. You chose a life of purpose, and I let my pride come between us. I regret how I treated you. You had every right to choose your own path. I was wrong." His handwriting was shaky, but deliberate. Every word hit harder than the last. "You may never have heard me say this aloud, but I respected you, even admired you. I just didn't know how to show it." The letter ended with one final sentence that changed everything. "To protect you and Lena, I left something behind. Something Karen was never meant to touch." My mother reached into a drawer and handed me a folder filled with sealed financial documents, offshore accounts, asset transfers, and deeds, millions. Not in my name. Not in Lena's. All in my mother's, hidden from the will, tucked away quietly and legally. "Your father gave this to me while he was still alive," she explained. "He didn't trust Karen, and he didn't want the money to be part of the official estate." I sat there, stunned, not because of the wealth, but because of what it represented. Trust, belief, love he couldn't say, but still showed. My inheritance wasn't just financial, it was finally knowing my father had seen me and never stopped caring. In the days that followed, I said nothing. No confrontations, no claims. I let Karan enjoy his victory, parading around as the new head of the company, smirking at me like I was nothing more than a forgotten relic. But behind the scenes, I began to move. With the funds my father had quietly secured for us, I started buying shares, not in my name, but through silent partners and trusted intermediaries. I reached out to executives my father had once relied on, men and women who had helped build the company from the ground up. They were cautious at first, then curious. Then, one by one, they pledged their support. "He always respected you," one of them told me. "We just didn't know if you'd ever come back." Piece by piece, I rebuilt a foundation, not for power, but for protection, for legacy. Karan, blinded by his arrogance, never suspected a thing. To him, I was still the grieving son with nothing but an old van and a useless past. Let him think that. The real plan wasn't about taking revenge. It was about restoring what my father built and making sure the wrong hands didn't destroy it. The storm was coming, and Karan didn't even see the clouds. It was a Monday morning when I walked into the company's headquarters, unannounced, unnoticed. I passed the reception desk, the familiar hallways, and finally stepped into the boardroom. Karan was already seated at the head of the table, smug and overconfident. He barely glanced at me. "You're lost, Ray. Staff lounge is 2 floors down," he said without looking up. I took my seat across from him and calmly laid a stack of documents on the table. "Actually," I said, "this is exactly where I need to be." He raised an eyebrow as the other board members filed in, faces he assumed were loyal to him. Then came the bombshell. "You thought that van was junk," I said, eyes locked on him. "But I saw it for what it really was, a door my father left open, and I walked through it." The room went quiet as I handed out copies of the documents. Proof of Karan's misuse of company funds, unauthorized personal expenses, and leases benefiting only him. The lead counsel cleared his throat and said, "Based on this evidence, an emergency vote has been called." One by one, hands went up. Karan was voted out, unanimously. His face drained of color. He looked around for someone, anyone, to defend him. That's when Lena stood up from the back of the room. She walked over and placed a single envelope in front of him. "Divorce papers." "You weren't in love with me, Karan," she said, voice steady. "You were in love with the title, President's son-in-law. That's all I ever was to you." He didn't say a word, couldn't. He was no longer the boss, no longer the husband, no longer in control. Everything he had manipulated, twisted, stolen, gone in a single morning, and I didn't have to raise my voice once. Weeks passed. The chaos faded, the headlines cooled, and for the first time in years our home was quiet, not with silence, but with peace. Lena, my mother, and I settled into a calm, ordinary life. No board meetings, no legal battles, no more pretending. Just family dinners, slow mornings, and long conversations we should have had years ago. Lena focused on rebuilding her life, and I returned to teaching part-time, something familiar, something that had always felt like home. Her son, Arian, became the center of our joy, bright-eyed, curious, always asking questions. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun set over the fields, he turned to me and said with a big smile, "One day, I'm going to run a company like Grandpa did." We all chuckled. My mother wiped a tear from her cheek. "Just make sure you run it with heart," I said, pulling him close, "because that's the part of Grandpa worth carrying forward." And in that moment, surrounded by family and warmth, I realized something. Power fades, money disappears, but love, the quiet, enduring kind, becomes the legacy no one can take. And that's exactly what we chose to live by. In the end, this wasn't a story about money, or power, or even revenge. It was about family versus ambition, how the hunger for status can blind us, and how quiet love often speaks the loudest. It was about inheritance, not of wealth, but of values, honesty, humility, resilience. It showed us that the sacrifices made in silence can echo louder than public victories. That justice, though delayed, finds its way when truth is carried with patience. And most of all, it reminded us, money can build walls between people. But love, unspoken, unconditional, builds bridges that last generations. What my father left behind wasn't a van or a fortune. He left a chance for healing, and I took it.